I'm going to talk about 12.5 recommendations to ensure your IT service management program succeeds. This is partly of what I've done over the years. We started to realize that certain areas you just need to understand really what is going on, and get the right things really in place to make sure that you're successful. We've seen too many people actually fail some of the areas. So what I'm going to do in the presentation is I'm using the what we call the 6 Ps, but it's based on the 4 Ps from ITIL, from service design. We're going to look at that. I'm going to look at these sort of different areas. I actually have included some of the things that some of you might be familiar with. Is the ABC of ICT cards, and I'll show you those later on. And because we quite often see those as the worst practice, and then say, okay, well, this is what you really need to do. So some of these, we said in the introduction, some of these recommendations are simple and pragmatic. Some of them take a lot of time and a lot of work, but the key thing is if you follow some of these guidelines, you will actually start to realize that things are a lot easier. Now, the first thing I want to do is go through what are the 6 Ps. Most of you might have seen this. I mean, you're looking at the 4 Ps from ITIL service design: people, process, product, and partners. The moment we actually start looking at those 4 Ps, and we use this a lot in organizations, to say if you want to improve, you need to look at these 4 areas. You need to look at, okay, what is the people issue, what are the process issues, what are the product issues, and the partner issues, and using that as a continual service improvement structure to say if we have an issue and we understand all these 4 different areas, it becomes actually easier. One of the things we did is that we started looking at, okay, well, that is sometimes not enough. And actually, if you look at older versions of ITIL, you will actually realize that performance is the 5th P that's quite often being used. And performance is really that balance of if the 4 Ps are in balance, if process and people and partners and product are really in balance, you will actually see that the performance actually gets better. You also need to have your measurements, etc., in place. Now, we added also the purpose in front of it, because why? When you actually look at the strategy of your organization, that needs to drive, okay, how are you actually going to build your processes, how are you going to use your product, your partners, but also what your people are going to do. So that's really what the idea is behind this the 6 Ps. Now, what I'm going to do is those recommendations that I'm going to talk about are all based on ITIL and IT service management. And one of the key things is after I tell people in all different kind of sessions that, okay, you need to understand the 4 Ps at least, and hopefully maybe the other 2 as well. There's only 2 things really you need to understand from an ITIL perspective. And it all boils down actually to the next slide and that is, what is a service? We've seen lots and lots of people actually coming out of all different kind of training courses, and when we ask them, okay, what is a service? They actually don't often know what that exactly is. So we use this definition from ITIL directly and say a service is means of delivering value, and it talks about outcomes, and it talks about cost and risk. And why is this so important? Because this is really what everything should drive. We started looking at organizations and say, okay, look, anytime you actually build processes or do something on the people side, etc., you need to understand what the outcomes are. You need to understand what the cost and what the risks are. I always said the reason why there's a kitchen there, a lot of people actually use restaurants as an example. I personally use it from a perspective that I have kids that when my wife is out of town, they always come to me and say, well, you need to make us some food, and then they have something like, but the food you actually build is not that good, so let's go out for dinner. And I always have this discussion with them about, okay, well, the value might not be as good if I make the food, but the key thing is the costs are lower. Yes, the risks are higher. So we use those discussions in every single thing of what we do in our life, and that is really what everything drives. So when we look at some of the recommendations, I'm just going to go through the recommendations. They're not in a specific order. They're There are things you need to think about whenever you actually start building an ITSM program or actually start implementing some of these processes. The first thing is know your customer. What are their requirements? I find it amazing how many IT organizations I've been at where IT doesn't talk to the customer to the extent that they actually should. We actually do sessions with them and say, okay, look, what as an IT organization do you think the customer wants? And then we go to the customer and say, what do you think, what do you really need? And there's always a mismatch. We haven't actually talked to them in properly. We don't understand sometimes what they're doing. To the point, actually, years ago, I actually brought in a guy from the oil and gas that came right out of one of the oil fields, and he was all dirty, etc. And you bring them into front of some IT people, and they look at you like that's a dirty person. I don't want to talk to them. But the key thing is, yes, they were dirty, we're all greasy, etc. But it is a user, and he was explaining really that if you don't understand my business impact, the fact is that if I have 30 guys that are standing, not doing nothing, it costs a lot of money just because of IT is not working. So know your customer. You see the VOCR here on this slide as well. Again, value, outcomes, cost, and risk. And talk to them about what is the value, what is the outcome, what are the costs, what are the risks. It is it's amazing that how many people actually don't do this, and you really need to start going to your customers and figuring that out. Now, if you understand the value, outcomes, cost, and risk, the next step is to actually define your ITSM strategy based on that. Again, when we look at these kind of things, recommendations, the interesting thing is that a lot of organizations are just building processes or building their ITSM strategy based on, okay, this is what we need to do. And most of organizations will look at incident management improvements or change management improvements, etc. And the only thing they're really looking at is, okay, from an IT perspective, let's make our life easier. While you actually need to really define a strategy based on what is the value of the customer for the customers and what is the outcomes for the customer. Some people will say we need configuration management or service asset and configuration management. And again, if you can define the value for the customer and if you define the outcomes for the customer, it will actually help. But if you do not understand that value, most of these projects will fail. And we have those discussions with our customers, etc., and say, look, this strategy should be based on what you want to accomplish. Now, that also means if you look at certain processes, you need to build the important components of the processes. I've had many organizations are working on incident management, and incident management is I mean, the process. A lot of people actually say, yeah, I want to improve that. And it staggers me sometimes how many actually work on incident management but have never really defined what to do in a major incident and actually build a procedure for that. Well, if we actually do that in organizations, we start to realize how much value that actually brings to the customer. That also means that, and this is going into the next one, is you need to develop just enough process. I always realize that IT people seem to want to have the perfect process in place. They want to have the best process in place, and they can spend months and months and months of building a process. I've built it with some organizations where we only do a very high-level process. Yeah? So the key thing, this chart is part of a documentation strategy we normally do with customers. And we say, you know what, you're going to use ITIL or COBIT or whatever you're going to use, and you build some process guides, maybe high level. And then we need to, for each of the processes, need to realize how deep do we need to go. Yeah, what level of detail do you really need to have in place for this process to work properly? What is the value of that documentation? And it's based on culture. Some organizations want to have really detailed documentation. Some technology requires that, and sometimes the skills of the staff needs that.
Peter, quick question there, and you raise a good point in that a lot of times I think we get caught up as IT professionals, especially from a process perspective, that we want to create the ideal, and we have very lofty goals when it comes to process and documentation and those things. So, any thoughts on a strategy in terms of documentation and what what you've seen with organizations and how they make decisions about what is process, what is managed and documented, and from a documentation perspective, how they go about that without things getting completely out of hand.
Yeah. No, that's a good question, Brad. One of the things we see is, and this is, I've seen this in one organization. The first time I actually realized this was when I had actually a merger of 3 organizations where the 3 organizations all had a different perspective on how much documentation was good enough. So we had one organization that just wanted to have a 20-page process document, and that was sufficient for them. And then the other organization wanted to just have 1 PowerPoint slide with the process flow, and that was enough. And then we had one organization where we actually built the processes, and they said, well, you have a 20, 30-page document for your process guide. That can't be enough, and all their process documentation was basically 100-page thick, etc. Everything needed to be in there, and that's one of the challenges we see. I find that if you build a process guide, that that is only really valuable for a process owner or for a process manager. What really adds value, we have a tabloid piece of paper where we actually have a quick reference guide for each process, and it tells you, okay, these are as a process manager or whatever role you fulfill, these are the daily things you need to do. These are the weekly things you need to do. This is the monthly things you need to do, and that is one pager, and people hang it on the wall and actually utilize that. And so it could be 1 page, it could be, and in the background we have this 100-page document if necessary, but those are some of the strategies we use. We often discuss this with the customer beforehand. Okay, show me some of your documentation, show me what you actually need. Does that answer your question, Brad?
Yeah, I think absolutely. One of the things that we see in many areas of IT, as you described, even when it comes to things like configuration management, that by the time, if you've got very lofty goals in terms of what assets you track and manage within your organization, in a lot of cases, by the time you capture all of that detailed information, things have changed anyway. And when you talk about documentation, what comes to mind for me are the big thick process manuals that are covered in dust that no longer reflect what the current reality is within IT or the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. One of the things that's related on this, and it's coming back to some of the previous points as well. What I find is interesting is that do the things that you need to do. We have the tendency to build a bigger process often than is actual necessary from a value perspective. The customer wants, we've seen this, for instance, in change management, where we try to actually build this whole process guide with all different kind of ideas around it. And if you really look at it, what the customer really wants is just have an idea when the change actually comes in or can go in, and when it actually comes out of there. So build your process on what is important and what are the important procedures. And important processes, I find that the more it actually is focused on the business, the more important processes are. So I normally start with incident and change and service level management and demand management, etc., because those processes really have a really effect on the business, and they actually understand that you involve them, and that's actually then will drive some of the other processes. The next one is roles and responsibilities. We're going to people side more, so we've done some of the process side, but now we're going into clarifying roles and responsibilities. I will not go in every slide in a lot of details. I'm actually working on a document that actually describes all these in detail, but based on the time I will go on a few of them here. One of the things is you have to clarify roles and responsibilities. one of the biggest challenges, you see this card here. This is one of the top cards actually that is selected if we do workshops and say which are the worst behaviors. It's actually not my responsibility. A lot of people are struggling with that. And it means defining the roles, but they're standard roles, but run it through simulations. One of the biggest learning points we've had is that run it through a simulation with either a simulation that is totally different environment. I mean, there's all different kind of on the market. We use Apollo 13 on and off on a regular basis, but we've seen also other ones, like for instance, where we actually take a process from a customer and actually run it through a simulation. Okay, what happens here? What happens there? How do we actually run this through? And then we sign off on those roles, and I often get people to sign off. This is one of the things is about clarifying these roles and responsibilities. More important sometimes even than the process, understanding who is responsible for what. Related to that is the whole thing about management commitment. Now, every ITIL book tells you need management commitment, and normally no one really understand what that means. Yeah, and that's it's coming back to the roles, etc. here as well, and this is some of the same text here. The key thing, what we find with management commitment is that people need to understand what they need to do. If you ask a manager, what does it mean? They will have something like, well, I need to be involved. Yeah, but you need to actually show it. You need to actually do it. A lot of you might have been through training courses. I find it always interesting every time we do an in-house course for someone, and we ask them, okay, can your CIO or your senior manager come and actually introduce the course? And they say, oh yeah, no, we'll do that, and we'll start at 8:15 or 8:30 or so, and then we'll do that. And the fact is, they never show up. They don't show up, and they just don't even get involved. They never show their face during the whole 3 days. And people actually look at it, but I thought they were going to be there. We just did some sessions where half of the people didn't show up or had other meetings, etc., and didn't want to really be there. So it's all about commitment. Now, commitment means that you need to show that, and that is part of leadership. When I look at leadership, is most of you will have issues with accountability and authority, etc. And the ability to lead, to be able, one of the challenges as an example, I'm just going to give an example here, is that leadership is not defined clearly, and a lot of leaders actually don't know exactly what to do. So what we sometimes do is actually say, okay, well, what do you need to actually say to these people? If I'm in a process, and as an example, I'm in incident management, and I realize that second and third level support staff does not fill in the records correctly. Yeah, they don't fill it in, they don't do anything. And as a process manager, you cannot go to second and third level support and say, well, you're not doing this correctly, you need to record correctly. Because they will actually report to a functional manager and they say, yeah, whatever. So we sometimes take the functional manager and say, are you agreeing that this is necessary? And then we say, okay, well, look, go in front of your staff and actually tell them how important this is. Yeah, and that it is important that they actually start to record correctly, and that they actually have the performance indicators maybe even linked to that. And that is what we see will help actually, but that really means a lot of coaching and mentoring. I think a lot of people think when we have implemented ITIL, it just automatically turns over and actually works. It doesn't. You actually need to do a lot of coaching and mentoring and making sure that people actually understand that. So process manager without authority is often one of the challenges we see here.
Quick question there for you, Peter. Yep. So, in going back to the last slide as well as this slide, when we talk about ITIL, right back to V2, one of the main things that we hear as a critical critical success factor in things like ITIL is getting management buy-in and helping to drive things down from the top. So, when we talk about those things, usually they're very high level and hard to put in context in a lot of organizations. So what have you seen or what practical suggestions do you have for for getting that buy-in. And either at the buy-in from the management level or the buy-in from the current slide that's up there, so the buy-in from the IT management and leadership. So what are your thoughts there from a practical perspective?
It's interesting. Yeah, good question. We see that there's a lot of different methods to actually get buy-in, etc., and it's often showing them really what the value is, and it's coming back to they're delivering a service, and we use the value, outcomes, cost, and risk often, and we start actually discussing with them. Okay, well, this is the value the customer is. This is the outcome the customer needs. So, what are the costs of you having to record everything, for instance, as an example, or do these kind of activities? And what are the risks of you not doing that? It's clarifying for everyone, okay, what this actually is. Other things is, like I said, I mean, we do a lot of coaching and mentoring and actually working with people to actually say, and this is what you need to do next. Ask your management team and what it is, what they see as commitment, what they understand as what is commitment. And often they will say, well, I need to be involved. And we often say, no, that's not the key thing. You need to actually be there. You need to be involved in the decisions. You need to actually stand up in front of your team to actually say, this is what you need to do. We had one CIO in one of our projects and in one of the town hall meetings state that I'm new here as CIO. I fully believe in ITIL, and I can tell you that one of you will not be here in the next 3 months because you didn't follow the process. And he actually did fire a person within the first 3 months, and everyone had something like, oh, we better follow processes now. I'm not saying that pain is always a good, inflicting pain is always good, but sometimes you actually have to, and it's making sure that everyone follows it. I think a lot of people actually can get away with it without, if you can get away with one time with a process, you just will do it on a regular basis, and that is constantly be on top of it. So make sure that you ask IT management, what do you see as your commitment? And if they don't say the right things, then say, okay, well, this is what we expect from you, and put it down in writing. That's one of the things we've done a lot, and that helps, seems to help at least.
Okay, great.
Okay. One of the other things is education and training strategy. I don't care how much ITIL certification training you do. That doesn't mean anything if you don't understand what to do with it. There's a lot of discussions. I mean, I have people coming out of the whole ITIL expert training, and when I look at them, they are very good in actually answering some of the questions on the exam, and they're good. They've proven for me that they actually have are able to actually answer multiple choice questions, but they don't really know what to do in their organization. And experiential learning is the key nowadays. Making sure that people actually understand what it really means. Yeah, we do simulations, and it doesn't matter which simulation there's lots and lots of different simulations in the market. We make a difference with what we call ITIL education, which is more the qualification scheme, etc. from ITIL. It's the ITIL training that makes it live. We make sure that, and we tell every customer, put this strategy in place where you have developed your process, you might have selected a tool, the two of them you actually bring together into a training session where you say, and from a case study scenario, this type of change, this is how it runs through your process, this is how it actually is being supported by a tool. And that learning is actually really what is necessary. So in the beginning of your program, you might do some ITIL education, and it helps have the knowledge. But the key thing is, the longer you get to the further you get into implementation, it really needs to be training. I always tell people, I'll do the nice version in this case, but you can maybe think about other options. But I always say, do you want to have your kid actually doing driver education, or do you want to have them do a driver training before you actually throw them on the road? And most people will say, well, I need to have them to do driver training. Why? Because that actually helps them to learn how it really works. You can do all the driver education you want, but it will not help you to actually get to become a good driver, and that's a key thing. It also needs to be just in time. Not too early, because then people have forgotten it, or not at all, or too late is not working as well. And I fully realize for a lot of organizations, actually, just in time is sometimes training is after we have already implemented. But, going on with a few key things, I'm going to skip a few slides here because I want to do one thing. This is partners. If you really want to discuss, okay, outsourcing and how you actually work with your partners and the accountabilities, etc., we use a lot of the information out of ISO IEC 20000, because that really defines how you actually would manage your relationship with your partners. And then, of course, everyone needs tools, unfortunately. Again, define the requirements, and there's a whole list of requirements you actually can utilize. I find it really good if it keep it simple. One of the biggest challenges I see is we put too many fields in a tool, or we put so many things in there that people actually never use. And I'll come back to that in a minute, actually. So like I said, I'm skipping a few of these. Eventually I will write this all out, and we'll make sure that we actually, that everyone understands that. The last two I want to talk about is measurement. Measure based on value, outcomes, cost, and risk, and the 4 Ps from ITIL. So understand that in each focus area and know exactly what you need to do. Now I'm going to give you an example on that and define what and how you're going to measure. This is just to go through key performance indicators, and I normally give this as an example. So if your goal as an IT organization is to improve quality of service, you need to translate it in something that really makes sense for and process. So what we do, for instance, is we say the goal of change management is to improve stability and improve responsiveness, based on all different kind of discussions you might have come up with that. Now, when you say improving the quality of service overall as an organization, or overall as an IT organization, it's very generic. Change management, a bit more, hey, we want to improve stability, we want to improve responsiveness. How do you get to that? You can actually then say, what does improve stability mean? And I didn't put it in there. I just give it more as an example, but improved stability is really, for instance, less incidents resulting from all these changes. But the most stable system, and some of you know that, is that you put a mainframe system with no users on there, and you have the most stable system there is. Yeah, because no one actually will interfere with it, but that doesn't help. So the key thing is you need to be responsive. You need to actually make sure that you have changes coming in. So when you look at the overall KPI here, is to understand I can actually have more changes at the same time, and then actually less incidents resulting from that. That is really the KPI to actually show that I'm improving the quality of the services. So take time to define what and how you're going to measure. Now, measurement, I'm going to briefly run through the next set of slides. This is what I've seen every single time, and it comes back to some of the things we really have an issue with. So if I look at past, present, and future, and today, the present, we have our 4 Ps, which is people, process, product, and partners, and that gives us a certain performance. Now, that performance will be captured in historical data. That historical data will actually then be used as strategy, or building my purpose, or changing the purpose, and actually then the vision. And that actually, again, we start actually working on that, and that changes our performance. This is what it should happen. The problem is, if our people, our process, and our product, and our partners are not aligned, they're not in balance, and there's a lot of issues with this, what happens is that they don't work, which means I don't get the performance I'm looking for. And then the next step is that instead of historical data, I actually get hysterical data. And that hysterical data is being used to build a strategy, a purpose, and a vision. And in my opinion, if you do that, you actually get a hallucination. And I know it's a bit of a joke, but the key thing is this is what happens in a lot of organizations, is we have this data that has nothing really that correct in there. There's a lot of issues with data quality, and you actually really build decisions based on that do not have the effect that you're actually looking for. So the only way to do this is to look at the 12 recommendations I showed you, and then all the different things that actually are influencing that, the 4 Ps. This is what it's all about, making sure that we actually continuously build that. I'm going to go to number 12 and a half. Number 12 and a half is build a CSI approach, and it's actually nice to hear that next week you're actually going into the CSI session, and I would really advise you to actually follow that, because for me CSI is the most important one. For me it is a very simple approach, and it's actually most people do plan, do, stop. What is they plan for something, do it, and then they stop and never look at it again. Our 5 steps for CSI is get together with the team that actually makes a difference. Review the 4 Ps or the 6 Ps in a structured approach. Make sure that every single thing you do, understand, okay, is it a people component, is it a product component, is it a process component. Review the KPIs and metrics that you've built that actually show you how well your value is, how well your outcomes is, the cost and the risk in the 4 Ps. Then engage the business and ask them what their priority is. And I started with some of that, know your customer. Well, you need to engage them in continual service improvement. And then use facilitation to discuss these changes and make sure that you actually discuss that. We do this in our simulations sometimes with Apollo 13, exactly those steps in between, and you see a major improvement. It can be that simple, but you need to use a structured approach. So the key thing is, I hope that some of these things actually made sense to you. I'm always asking people, what are you going to do now? Because it's great to listen to something, but if you don't do anything, then it's not going to actually make a difference. So hopefully that helps. And if you want to contact me, or if you want to follow me on Twitter, please feel free to do that, or link with me on LinkedIn. I would like to thank everyone, and if there's any specific questions, let me know.
Okay, great. Thanks, thanks, Peter. That was good, and we're pretty much right on time. One quick question. I don't think we have any questions from the audience at this point, although if you do have any following today's session, you've got Peter's contact info, or you can get in touch with us at info@thoughtrock.net. One quick question, Peter, is the just on the 12 and a half. So what's the background on 12 and a half steps versus 13?
Well, yeah, no, I get actually, the only reason why I do it is actually gets people's attention. And plus that, the 12 are really the ones that are really the great, the things that you need to do. The half one is actually overarching over all of them. So I needed to come up with something else, and I saw it from another person actually in a totally different field that he did that. So some people quite often want to know, why 12 and a half? Yeah, just because it catches attention. That's the only thing.
Very good. Okay, well, with that, we will end up for today's session.